What would have stopped you? This is the question that British journalist Alex Hannaford asked 50 mass killers, 12 of which responded. While speaking to the source is eye-opening, it's important to remember that these people speaking are killers, many of whom are looking for someone or something to blame for their atrocities, whether that's holding the Second Amendment accountable, the government, the ill-equipped mental health services of the United States, or even their parents. I do urge everyone watching not to take their words as gospel. Like all my videos, this is not intended to be political. In December 1999, a 36-year-old Cuban immigrant named Silvio Izquierdo-Leyva burst into the hotel he worked at in Tampa, Florida. At this time, it was crowded with American football fans. He then proceeded to gun down 4 of his co-workers and shot a 5th person as he was trying to escape. Unsurprisingly, Silvio was given a life sentence without parole. He didn't want to speak to Alex, but he was happy to write a few of his thoughts. Reflecting on the situation, he believed that his colleagues could have averted the attack if they had reported his concerning behavior in the workplace. Izquierdo-Leyva expressed the idea that limiting access to firearms for individuals with mental health issues could potentially decrease mass shootings to isolated incidents at most, since knives would be stoppable and homemade bombs need materials and work, which can be detected before they reach their goal.
8 people are dead and several others wounded after a gunman stormed into a North Carolina nursing home and opened fire. The shootings happened around 10 a.m. at Pine Lake Health and Rehab in Carthage.
In 2009, a 45-year-old man named Robert Stewart opened fire at a nursing home in North Carolina, killing 8 people and was promptly sentenced to life in prison. Both his age and the target stand out on this list. The majority of the people who replied to Alex are much younger, usually around their 20s, and he's the only one to have targeted a nursing home. He claims he didn't remember the incident as he was on prescription medication at the time. He said, "There's a serious mental health issue here in the United States. The government keeps dancing around the issue. Their solution is to put mental health patients in regular prison." A few weeks later, Stewart wrote back saying he wanted Alex to know that he stood behind the Second Amendment. "That's the only way the people can keep the government from becoming tyrants," he said.
I came out to this area here when I saw him, and I yelled, 911, man with a gun, shots fired.
Robert Ledford remembers the gunman, Eric Houston, a high school dropout who stormed onto campus with a .22 caliber rifle and a shotgun.
And he shot into this room and killed Jason White.
California, 1992. Eric Houston, at an age of 20, walked into Lyndhurst High School and killed his former teacher as well as 3 students with a shotgun and a sawn-off rifle. He was sentenced to death. Eric acknowledged that mass killings occur for a multitude of reasons, but was more against the Second Amendment than others, stating some of the reasons as depression, anger, isolation, money, and family problems. Houston expressed his wish for a future where guns would be prohibited for the general public, advocating for limited options such as tasers or pepper spray for home defense. The only people who need guns are the military and state National Guard, I think. A question that needed to be agreed upon before Alex could begin his attempt to contact 50 mass killers was, what defines a mass shooting? The definition of a mass shooting used for the Stanford database is 3 or more shooting victims, not including the shooter himself. It can't be related to gang violence, drugs, or organized crime, but there doesn't have to be a single fatality. Considering incidents where nobody loses their life adds an interesting dimension, and Alex opted to adopt this definition. The rationale behind this decision lies in scenarios like when someone uses a bolt-action hunting rifle to shoot up their school, causing injuries to 10 students with glass and shrapnel, yet no fatalities occur. The question arises, should this be classified as a mass shooting? Many would likely agree, as that's precisely what Chad Escobedo did in April 2007.
The legacy of Columbine. Ever since that mayhem 15 years ago, we've seen more and more of these mass shootings, many by troubled young men inspired by the Columbine killers.
In April 2007, Gresham, Oregon. A 15-year-old Chad Escobedo took his stepfather's hunting rifle to his school, Springwater Trail High. Escobedo informed the police that he harbored anger toward two specific teachers and was also upset with his mother for not allowing him to live with his biological father. His motivation stemmed from watching a television documentary about the tragic shootings at Columbine High School in 1999, where two individuals killed 12 students and a teacher before taking their own lives in Colorado. Escobedo's teachers and classmates expressed shock, as none of them could have anticipated such actions from him. On that day, by some kind of miracle, he only injured 10 students with 0 fatalities, with one requiring neck surgery and another needing the removal of shrapnel and shards of glass from her wrist. Alex asked him, "Looking back, is there anything you think could have been done to stop you doing what you did? Was counseling available? Would you have taken it if it was, and do you think it would have helped?" Chad, now an adult, replied, "I did seek counseling prior to my crime," he replied, "but the counselor never took heed of what I was talking about, my problems, issues at home, everyday teenage obstacles, really." "What about access to guns?" Alex asked. At this point in my research into this, it did become quite apparent that the journalists speaking with the mass shooters did have some kind of agenda. I don't say this to discredit him, but just keep that in mind. "I think background checks do enough work," said Chad. "Convicted felons can't access them. Keeping guns from people is never going to happen, especially in the US. The only reason I had access to a gun was because my stepfather owned one and I knew where he kept it." He continued to elaborate. "If there were a law that said to lock firearms up at home, I think that would have prevented me from using his rifle. Children and teens can usually access a firearm if there aren't any deterrents such as trigger locks or ammunition containers. There will always be terror in the world," he wrote. "We can't hide from that truth. Bad people will come and go, and there will be good men to stop them. All sorts of things can be used as a weapon. You can make weapons easily if you take the time and effort to figure it out, but disarming a nation will not help at all. I can no longer defend myself when in my own home or out and about downtown. I can't carry. I'm defenseless. So I sure as hell wouldn't want any good Samaritan next to me to be defenseless as well." After building trust, Alex was able to give Chad a phone call. On the phone call, Alex tried to get to the bottom of what drives someone to the edge and what goes through the mind of someone who decides to carry out a mass shooting. "I think they're ignored, not listened to," said Chad Escobedo. "There are many cases besides mine where mass shootings happened and they found the perpetrator was taking antidepressants or certain drugs. I wasn't on any drugs, but I wasn't trying to kill anybody. I was trying to instill fear into the public. I felt trapped, like I was in a cage," he told Alex. "I wasn't liking school. I was never a straight A student, but I didn't get bad grades. But there was this teacher who was always on my case about certain things. I was texting girls in class and he tried taking my phone away. I called him some names and a feud developed between us. I started failing his classes. I like soccer, but they wouldn't let me play on the team. It was getting to the point where it was a burden to get up in the morning to go to school. I felt like no one cared what I wanted in life. They thought I was just being an adolescent." Admittedly, Chad Escobedo, in my opinion, is the lesser of the evils presented today. His brain wasn't fully developed when he committed his crime, and no one died from his actions. But the lesser of evils is still evil. If you're enjoying this video, please take a moment to hit the like button. It only takes a second and makes a massive difference to the channel. Thank you.
And a human rampage spreads death and terror across the University of Texas campus. 24-year-old student Charles Whitman goes berserk, shooting from the top of the 28-story tower. Victims are hit at the rate of 1 every 3 minutes. Men, women, children, all are targets. The crazed sniper sends bodies crumpling to the ground everywhere for over an hour. Finally, Whitman is shot dead by Austin police.
In 1966, Robert Smith committed a mass shooting in Arizona, believed to be inspired by what is often considered the first school shooting in U.S. history. The earlier incident occurred at the University of Texas at Austin the same year when Charles Whitman, having already killed his mother and wife, climbed a tower on the university campus. Whitman shot and killed 14 people, injuring 31 others before being fatally shot by police. Smith's copycat shooting in Arizona resulted in 5 deaths and 1 injury. Robert Smith seemed much more aware of his situation and the value of his opinions than the others who wrote to Alex. Maybe it's due to having so many years to come to terms with everything. He thanked Alex for the letter and simply said, "I strongly suspect your missive represents a mass mailing to mad dog killers across this country. I wish you good fortune with your enterprise, which sounds most worthwhile. However, I must respectfully decline to participate as my raving lunacy renders my opinions on any subject altogether worthless." Alex tried to press for an in-person interview and received a brief response. "I can muster no enthusiasm whatsoever for chatting about crimes and criminals or the evil that lurks in the hearts of men. Regarding my own damnable atrocities, I can assure you, such would be as distressful for me to relate as for you to hear, if not more so. My advice, leave the Americans behind to merrily murder each other, for clearly such is the fate we were born for." There were a few others who offered little to no interest in talking, but their words and perspective, though brief, presented a unique insight. Another person who understood their position but had a different approach and reasoning for not wanting to engage with Alex further was Andrew Wurst, a person who was 14 years old when they killed their science teacher and injured 2 students at a middle school dance in Pennsylvania in 1998, communicated that they couldn't assist with this particular story, out of respect and consideration for my victims. And then there was Richard Farley, who refused to speak for a more diplomatic reason. Richard, who in 1988 shot and killed 7 people in his workplace, wrote, "Years from now, after my appeals are over, I may be interested in giving my opinions on motivations, but not now. Interesting to see how someone with no hope who has lost everything seems to still have some value in self-preservation." Another mass killer requested to be kept anonymous, a request which appeared surprisingly absent from the rest. They wrote, "One's will is the true weapon, but I believe that better mental health services are one of the most obvious and surest ways to have a meaningful impact." And another was advised to keep quiet, an instruction given to them by their lawyer.
Johnny Seven's got him on the run. Johnny Seven fires bullets like a rifle. Fires like a Tommy gun. Now it's a cap-firing pistol. You've won with Johnny Seven, the one-man army gun. It's 7 guns in one. Let's count them.
One mass killer who agreed to a phone call was William Hardesty. In 1978, under the influence of drugs and alcohol, he went on a violent spree in California and Michigan, resulting in 7 deaths. The only potential factor that could have halted this rampage, in his own words, would have been some sleep. Equipping himself with a pump-action rifle, he shot his father in the back and then awaited his mother's return. Upon her arrival, he shot her in the head while she was washing dishes in the kitchen. Subsequently, he concealed his father's body by placing it beneath a stack of meat in a freezer on his front porch. During the early hours of the next morning, he drove to a local bar named Abigail's Dirty Shame Saloon and shot 2 men in the parking lot. A few hours later, he shot and fatally injured his former brother-in-law while also wounding another man. Upon reaching his parents' house, the police heard music playing inside. Pushing the front door open, they heard someone loading a gun. State troopers took cover behind trees as Hardesty emerged onto the porch with a rifle. Pointing it at them, he was shot in the shoulder and stomach before being arrested. He called Alex one afternoon from his cell, and the journalist asked what would have stopped him doing what he did. "I was doing drugs and going through a divorce," William said. "I was having nightmares, and they got so overwhelming I couldn't think." William said his father used to hit him on the head repeatedly with a tool from his shed. I'd get out of work, come over, and he'd grab my head. He used to call me Willie Lump Lump Coz. I had so many lumps on my head. But he's the one who put them there. It just snowballed. I couldn't handle it, and instead of trying to talk to him if I did, he'd backhand me. I shot him, my mother, my brother-in-law, a guy who worked with him, and the others. When Alex inquired about what he might have done if the weapon, his father's gun, hadn't been available for him to access, Hardesty expressed doubt that anyone would have lost their life. I wouldn't have got into a fight with him instead. My dad was a big man, a foot taller than me. As usual, Alex turned the conversation towards gun control in the US, and William responded, "My family all hunted, but if my father's guns had been locked up, it could have been a different story. You can't get rid of guns, but Put a lock on them at least. If you have guns in your house, they have to be locked up unless you are using them. That would stop a lot of people getting killed. You'd be surprised how many people don't take a drink of alcohol because the cabinet is locked, regardless of what your stance on the Second Amendment is. I think these mass killers are not good spokespeople or mascots for the anti-gun movement. They might make some valid points, but at the end of the day, they have killed innocent people and are almost definitely searching for anything to blame. Please make your own opinions and do your own research outside of this video.
This court hereby sentences you to death by lethal injection.
A man accused in a cross-country killing rampage.
In 2007, whilst drunk and high on crystal meth, Paul Devoe went on a shooting spree and was sentenced to death. He went after a number of his ex-girlfriends and whoever was unlucky enough to be around at the time. Devoe had a criminal record before he went on his killing spree, and according to the law, he shouldn't have been able to obtain a gun. However, he explained that his colleague was away at a wedding, and since he had a key to his house and knew where the weapon was kept, he was able to access it. The journalist Alex asked him what he would have done if he wasn't able to find a gun. Would he have resorted to using a knife instead? Paul responded, "No, if I hadn't had the gun, it wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have jumped in the truck that night and left." Paul explained that his childhood had been rough, with his alcoholic dad physically abusing both him and his siblings, to the point which he feels it still affects him. "Even to this day, I get panic attacks. I'm on psychotic medication," he said. "If I hear two guys arguing in here in prison, I start freaking out. I have a panic attack. I try to turn up my radio, put the headphones on to avoid it, but a lot of the times I can't. It's too late. My heart starts racing, I start sweating, and I get shaky." Alex asks whether psychotic medication could have changed the outcome 10 years ago. "I believe so," he said. Ultimately, Paul seems to believe a combination of mental health and guns led to that life-changing day in 2007. If you've enjoyed this video so far, please make sure to subscribe and comment. I can't keep making content without your help. Thank you so much for watching.
Yosemite Sam! It's Yosemite Sam!
Luther Casteel caused the death of 2 individuals and injured 16 others in a shooting spree at an Illinois bar in 2001. A year later, he was sentenced to death. However, when George Ryan concluded his 4-year term as the state's governor in 2003, he granted clemency to all inmates on death row, citing concerns about the fairness of the system. As a result, Casteel's sentence was reduced to life imprisonment. The event that ultimately led to his life sentence occurred in the town of Elgin, located northwest of Chicago. At the age of 42, Casteel was ejected from a bar by 2 bouncers for bothering women. However, before heading home, he made a vow for revenge. He shaved his head into a mohawk, donned a combat jacket, and came back equipped with a .357 Magnum in a shoulder holster, a 9mm pistol on his belt, and a sawn-off 12-gauge shotgun. Alex was able to get a face-to-face interview with the killer. Luther explained he had suffered from depression all of his life, but made it immediately clear that nothing excused what he did. "However, I do offer reason," he said. "I have an extremely antisocial personality," he said. "It's deep within me, not superficial, where it can be seen, and I have contempt for the police and society in general." Luther was stockpiling weapons and ammunition well before the incident in the bar, and was preparing for something he described as much bigger. Whilst he wouldn't elaborate on exactly what this was, he did explain he was arming up for an eventual death stand. He explained it wasn't premeditated, but he was triggered by the bouncer. He went on to say after he shot up the bar, he left there as motherfucking Satan. "If a cop would have stopped me, or Jesus, I'd have killed their goddamn ass dead." In Luther's opinion, creating a mass shooter was very much about nurture and not nature. Mass killers aren't born, they're created. Alex asked Luther what he thought about his parents. "Are they culpable? They should have been hanged," he said. "The prison authorities came to me in 2005 when I was in state penitentiary to tell me my dad had died. You may as well have told me it was raining outside because it made no difference to me whatsoever." Casteel claimed that his parents poisoned him and his 2 brothers. At the age of 13, he fired a gun for the first time. To secure money for food, he resorted to theft and slept in various places like under porches, on rooftops, and in garages. As he started discovering guns in the houses he had robbed, he began using them to carry out armed robberies as well. Alex turned the conversation towards the Second Amendment and asked Luther, would he have committed the crimes for which he's now serving a life sentence if he hadn't been able to access them? I hear a lot about gun control, and truly it's laughable, he said. You will never ever rid the United States of America of guns. Guns are all over the street. Did I have to get a background check to get an 8-ball of cocaine? No. All I had to have was a little money. There's so many guns in this country, it's just pathetic. It's asinine. Luther's stance on what could have stopped him was quite different from most, as he seemed to think the primary factor was his upbringing. He spoke of Dylan Roof, a 21-year-old white supremacist who shot and killed 9 black worshippers at a church in 2015, saying, somebody poisoned that kid to make him hate people like that, 'cause it's just not a natural thing to hate people because of their color, he said. And there's this boy who now sits on death row in a federal penitentiary somewhere when in fact they should have his mother and father on death row. In conclusion, there is no conclusion. Take what I've shown you and make up your own mind. Tell me what you think. What's the root cause of these mass shootings? Can they ever be stopped? Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, keep fearing the living.